Center of Light. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Unity Center of Light. Today's service will be led by our licensed Unity teacher and wonderful, beloved fellow congregant, April May. My name is Christine Harper, and I'll be your introductory platform assistant. I'm glad you're here. Is there anyone here for the first time? I looked through the names. Everyone looked familiar, but if you're here for the first time, welcome. We're glad you're here to join us. We're going to get started with the mission and foundation statement. I'll read it and you can read it along with me, but while on mute, please. The mission of Unity Center of Light is to empower individuals to express their indwelling divine identity. We teach there is a power within each of us far greater than anything that exists outside of us. And our foundation statement is, there is only one power and one presence active in my life and affairs, God, the good omnipotent. And now I will turn it over to our congregant, Kathleen, to read the daily word. Kathleen?
Good morning, Unity family. Yeah, the daily word is valuable, that we're divine beings. And this is really why the board suggested changing the mission statement a while back to focus on divine identity instead of just divine potential. So valuable, as a divine being, I am valuable and irreplaceable. Each person is a spiritual being made in the image and likenesses of God, blessed with a variety of spiritual gifts we share in different ways. The world needs my unique contributions. When I see myself this way, I become newly aware of my value as a member of the human family, more confident in myself as I shine the light of God as only I can. Living in the awareness of my value helps others see it too. I leave behind the critical or negative opinions that I may have held about myself and treat myself as the divine being that I am. Like a beautiful gemstone, I too am a precious jewel among so many others. Together we sparkle and shine. And from Genesis 1:27, so God created mankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. And now we are going to have a talk with our beloved April May, who is a licensed Unity teacher, which any of you who might have looked at that curriculum know how intensive that is in her training. And she is an experienced teacher. And if you've not experienced having her as a teacher, I certainly encourage you to do so, as I have certainly benefited from her wisdom. And so without further ado, we'll have our message today.
Morning, everybody. I feel very blessed to be here this morning, and I have to tell you that even though getting into the meeting today was not a test, it is an absolute example of turning an unfortunate series of events into a fortunate series of events. So we'll talk a little bit, a lot more about that. But there is a reason why the title has in parentheses and then fortunate. So most of you know me, and many of you know me pretty well, but there are a few who are less familiar with me. So I just ask you to put up with a moment's worth of introduction, so nobody's wondering about these sorts of things. And some of you have heard this before. Yes, my name really is April May. No, I was not born in either one of those months. In actuality, I was born in March. So I'm March, April, May. And I remember asking my mother at one point in time, what were you thinking to name me April May? And she said, I really never got any farther than the fact that it was beautiful. Now, how can you argue with logic like that, right? But I did say to her, well, I said it was certainly character building, and God bless my mother, who always had a good sense of humor. She said, and yes, and look at the character that we built. So, um, welcome to my life and the acquisition of my name. I am a licensed Unity teacher. But like most of you, I had a lot of lived experiences before I came to that one. And I like to think that those brought me to the place where I was open and receptive to receive the message that I was actually going to get to be what a lot of people, I have a friend who always says if everybody got to be what they wanted to be when they grew up, the world would be full of ballerinas and firemen. But the truth is, I always wanted to be a teacher. My sisters, I made them play spelling bees and stuff, and they didn't like it then, but they're great spellers to this day. As I aged, one of the things I came to understand that most deep knowledge really is that knowledge that we already have within. And the true role of a teacher is simply to help us to bring that out of ourselves and be able to express it and live it. So today's message really is all about how we all are metaphysicians. We all are teachers and students and teachers and students. I think it's the Course in Miracles that says that the most clearly. And I want to start our time together with some gratitudes and some acknowledgments. I think sometimes to get where we're going, it's important to see where we have been and what we've been doing. So, like many of you, my ancestors in this unity movement were Myrtle and Charles Fillmore. Several things that they said inspired me to look deeper and deeper and to look again. With Myrtle, it was I'm a beloved child of God, and I do not inherit sickness. With Charles, it was I'm going directly to headquarters. And for him, that didn't mean an office building, it meant going within. And then my second favorite of Myrtle Fillmore's statements that really resonated deeply with me, and which I found in the woods out at Unity Village, there was a plaque in an outdoor chapel that said, "Here in the silence, we feel the presence of God and know what it is we would be doing with this life we've been given." And that one still to this day really kind of gives me God bumps when I share it with people because it resonated so deeply for me, not just that I could feel the presence of Myrtle saying it, but that I could also feel it in that nature place. But our ancestors had teachers of their own, people who inspired them and contemporaries. It is often said that Myrtle represented the heart or the faith of the belief in divine mind, and that Charles was more of the scientist and represented the mind, the science of new thought. As a matter of fact, there was a book that was written about the origins of unity called Spirits in Rebellion. And it was about not only the Fillmores, but people like E.B. Weeks and Emerson and Thoreau and Ernest Holmes, and even their teachers, people like Meister Eckhart, who really began this idea that dogma was not necessary and intercessors were not necessary to have a deep connection with spirit. That as Eric Butterworth liked to tell the story, the truth of our divinity was buried within, which made it difficult for us in our humanity sometimes to find it. So the folks like Charles and Myrtle and Emerson and Thoreau and Ernest Holmes were called transcendentalists, and their ideas and thoughts really were moving away from moving away from dogma and moving more into statements that were about revealing the truth from our inner wisdom, our inner spirit, our divinity, as opposed to just our humanity. Now, they were also dealing with our humanity because they had human challenges of their own, right? With Charles, it was a withered leg from an injury when he'd been younger. And with Myrtle, it was tuberculosis. And they spent and focused their lives on the energy of healing. And many, many people to this day still come to Unity philosophy through a focus on healing. I know one of the first places I heard about Unity was in the resources section of Louise Hay's You Can Heal Your Life. So I was directed to a Unity church, and I'll tell you when it really began to come together for me, and you may resonate with this, is I walked into the lending library of that particular Unity church, and there was a book in there called The Gospel According to Emerson. Well, I was a big fan of what I considered the nature writers, Emerson and Thoreau, and I didn't realize at the time that they were contemporaries of the Fillmores. And because one of the places I powerfully connected with spirit was in nature, I thought, well, if Emerson can buy into this, then there must be something here for me. So that was a good starting point for me. Now, in addition to the Fillmores having great teachers and contemporaries, they also were big thinkers and studiers of world religions. Although ours is called practical Christianity, there are a lot of elements of other world traditions in our teachings. This idea of going within, the story that I believe it's Eric Butterworth tells in the beginning of Discover the Power Within You, is that when the gods were saying, well, what should we do with man's divinity, humanity's divinity? And the suggestion was, well, put it within them because that's the last place they'll think to look. And so when, I heard Eric Butterworth say that Jesus came not to impress us with his divinity, but to remind us of our own, that was a powerful, affirming statement for me that I was on the right path, because I had already done some Native American studies and studies in other world religions. And there was a part of me that really understood deeply that just because my way was my way, it didn't make it everybody's way or your way or my neighbor's way. And I didn't like the idea that in order for my way to be right, that someone else's way needed to be wrong. So I liked the embrace that I felt in Unity, that, that we're all on our own path and it looks different for each and every one of us. As a matter of fact, another thing that connected me deeply to, and this was my spirit in rebellion, no big surprise for most of you who know me, to amount to anything, I don't particularly like to be told what to do, right? It's just a part of who I am. Patty's smiling. You just cover up that smirk. I saw it. But in Unity, I heard a teacher say, in Unity, you're not told what to think. You were just asked to think. And I was like, yeah, I feel that. I can feel that there's a way for everybody to traverse their path if they're just asked to think and not told exactly what to think. So now this doesn't mean, though, that the Fillmores didn't establish some doctrine. And remember, doctrine is very different than dogma. Doctrine doesn't say you have to feel this way. It doesn't say you have to believe this way. It postures statements for you that you can potentially adopt as your own or not. But they thought it was helpful for people. What Charles Fillmore said was that people were telling him that Unity was fuzzy in their belief system. And he's like, yeah, no, we're not fuzzy at all. And so he came up with something that some of you may be familiar with, and you can find it on the Unity Worldwide Ministries website. It's called the Statements of Faith. And in the statements of faith, Charles Fillmore goes through and he says a lot of different things about what he believes. Now, the thing that's interesting is he doesn't say you have to believe this to be in unity, but he does say that it's a foundational idea that these are the things that we embrace. So I invite you to look more at that. We could do a whole series of talks on the doctrines of faith, but it is a foundation document for unity. The other, of course, that most of you are much more familiar with is our 5 principles. We talk about them a good part of the time. We talk about the way they affect our lives, and how they give form and structure to what we think, what we do, what we believe, and how we operate in the world. And we'll talk about those just a little bit more. There's also our 12 powers, which are a very foundational premise of unity that tell us what attributes of God that we have the potential to fully express in our own lives and in our series of events. So the other thing that happened out of Charles and Myrtle's dedication to prayer and meditation were the formation of, for lack of a better word, organizational structures that support people in unity now. It started out with the Correspondence School, which some of you may or may not be familiar with. They were actually lessons that you could get, that you could fill out and mail in. There are packages of booklets that you can still sometimes find in some of the older bookstores that are the correspondence courses. They were the beginnings, really, of the teachings and people wanting to get them out more into the world and into groups of people. From there, we also established organizations like Unity World Headquarters. Many of you are familiar with them because, of course, they're the publishers of the Daily Word. They also publish the booklets that we use in our discussion groups, and they publish the Unity books as well. Several years ago, and they're the home of Silent Unity, in case I didn't mention that already, which of course many of us have availed ourselves of, some of us more than a few times. And they also, several years ago, took on the role of the Unity Worldwide Spiritual Institute. So that's the whole teaching arm of Unity that teaches spiritual seekers, that teaches licensed Unity teachers, and that also teaches ministers. They're responsible for helping to get out the people that are structured to be able to teach Unity classes for SEE credits, spiritual education and enlightenment. Some of you have taken some of those classes. Some of you have taken many of those classes, like Kathleen has taken quite a few. And then there's an outshoot of that, which is what we call Unity Urban Ministerial School, which was formed from the desire to serve ministers who wanted to teach in more urban communities, places like Detroit and New York and Chicago. That was born out of a desire for people to become ministers who were also adult learners who couldn't necessarily take 2 years off to go out to seminary at Unity Village. And they have licensed and are taught many, many teachers and licensed teachers. The other organization born out of these teachings and truths is Unity Worldwide Ministries. And they're actually responsible for the licensing and ordination of teachers and licensed teachers once they've completed a certain portion of their training. Another organization is the Unity Eastern Region, which many of you know I'm affiliated with. That's a group of Unity churches from Maine down to Virginia, and we serve local ministers and ministries. We put on a yearly conference, which you all hear about from me every year. We offer things that are called 21st Century Ministry trainings. Now, why is all of this important to our discussion of unfortunate events? And I would say that it's because education, whether it's formal education or our own commitment to education, is an important part of being able to shift ourselves from an experience of unfortunate events to fortunate events. And I'll give you an example. Even Unity has a history of not necessarily being in alignment with ways of working with people of different races and genders. And there were pioneers in our movement, like Johnny Coleman, who was a Black Unity minister who was actually told she couldn't live on the grounds of Unity Village. And she went out and shook this movement up and not only created another way to be with that information, but also eventually changing the way that Unity looked both at ministers of color and of different genders. So we also have a history of these spirits in rebellion continuing to shake even the foundations of Unity. And I don't think that would be happening if we weren't, again, not telling people what to think, but asking them to think. She knew in her heart of hearts that there was a problem with what was going on. Now, if you've been out to Unity Village in the recent years, you'll find that there's a house out there now that is dedicated to her and has the history of her and her changes on the movement about making us more fully in alignment with inclusivity and diversity. So that's kind of exciting to know that even when we had our own challenges, that there were folks that were willing to shake, rattle, and roll that to the point where it shifted and changed. That was taking an unfortunate series of events and coming up with a fortunate outcome. So the thing to know about what's going on in our movement now, and which moves us to the present tense, is that we have an amazing amount of teachers who have come through our system. And when I say teachers, I don't just mean licensed teachers, I mean ministers, spiritual leaders, and teachers who have come through our system and who are, some of them are still out here in the world making tracks and making changes and encouraging transformation. And some have passed on. People like Emily Cady and Eric Butterworth, who were shift makers in our movement, are no longer with us in person, but are still changing the way we look at things from the standpoint of their publications and their talks being out there. Catherine Ponder is another person who dramatically shifted the scene of people and the way that they looked at prosperity in their lives and in their centers. We are moving now into more contemporary ministers who are beginning to show us even more new ways of moving through the world. Reverend Sandra Campbell, who's one of the heads of Unity Urban Ministerial School, has really changed the face of ministerial education by making it very accessible online to people who are working full-time jobs and who still are feeling a call to ministry. We have people like Linda Martella Whitsett who are changing the face of prayer as we know it and helping us to go deeper and deeper into our own prayer practices. We have people like John Paul Roach who are helping us to make connections in an interfaith kind of way to the other ideas of spirituality in the world and seeing our roots in those traditions as well. People that we've had speaking to us before, like Paul Hasselbeck, who really is, we call the metaphysical guru, who really is all about metaphysics. And what's truly exciting to me is that we have now new people coming into the scene like Kathleen Kerswig and Richard Pacheco that we've seen and heard from on a number of occasions, who are really bringing a new generational look at things like the teachings of Jim Rosemergy, for instance, who, is a dear beloved teacher of mine through being able to be with him, but also being able to read his many, many books on the transformation of the soul. And being able to bring those teachings into contemporary understanding. Now, who have I left out? Not on purpose, but best for last. Our own minister, Millage Mosby, who pioneered this ministry along with others 33 years ago this year. We were talking about that before we got started today. And the work and the courage and the passion it takes to pioneer a ministry. And I'm here to tell you guys, do a Sunday lesson week after week after week is something that I truly admire and appreciate. And I just have to say that if it weren't for that cadre of angels, all of what I've just spoken to you about, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't have been encouraged to become a licensed teacher. I wouldn't have been supported in doing that. I wouldn't have had people who were not afraid to have someone else's voice be heard, but who actually wanted people to be able to hear voices other than their own. So am I riding on the shoulders of many, many angels? Absolutely. And there are more here today that you'll see throughout the course of our service who are truly supporting me in being able to do this today. You've already seen Christine and Kathleen supporting me, and you're going to see more, even more. So the other thing that I want to mention as we move into a true exploration of unfortunate and fortunate events is this idea that we're being reminded now all the time that metaphysics is not just something that's in books or in the Bible. It's in our lives, it's in our books, it's in our movies, and it's in our lives, and it's in our lives, and it's in our lives, right? And part of what can help us to make this shift to shaking it up in our lives is recognizing that metaphysics are constantly occurring around us and how much we're willing to experiment with them and explore them is a large piece of what's going to move us from the unfortunate to the fortunate. Now, in this whole history that I was talking to you about with the history of New Thought, there was also a lot just going on in the world as well, right? There were world wars, there was a depression, there's been the Korean War, and there's been more and more war. And there's also been economic challenges that people have been having, political challenges that we're still having to these days. All of these things are still going on in the context of us being truth students. So let's take a deep breath, because one of the first things we're going to remind ourselves that throughout this entire process, we need to remember to breathe. There's a lot to assimilate here. We've just been through a world pandemic and we're coming out the other side, not unscathed, and yet not tortured and punished by it. Excuse me. If we're able to embrace the fortunate as well as the unfortunate. Now, I'm going to be very clear and I'm going to say that one of the first places I always go, and this I can attribute this to my mother, is the dictionary, right? And I wanted to see what the difference was in unfortunate and fortunate. Well, un is really just a prefix that you could put in front of almost anything, unhappy, whatever. And it's implying that it is not that thing or the opposite of that thing. So in the case of unfortunate, not fortunate, or the opposite of fortunate is what that's implying. And what I want to challenge us to do is to look at it in a way that says maybe it's not so much the opposite of, as it is the flip side of the same coin. So we're not looking at living in duality, we're looking at living in dichotomy, which is really just a matter of the difference being oftentimes perspective. So fortunate says favored by or involving good luck, being lucky or being blessed. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a little problem with the concept of luck. And I'll give you just a small example. I have on today something that I used to call my lucky cat. And now I call it my fortunate cat because lucky implies that we didn't do anything to deserve that it just came to us, that we didn't do any work, that we're not just blessed or given grace, that somehow or another we just got lucky. So the other thing I would challenge, in addition to saying that unfortunate is the opposite of fortunate, I would also challenge us to saying fortunate is not as much about luck as it is about being willing to position ourselves in the space to be fortunate and to receive the blessings. Because the truth of the matter is that no matter what's going on in the world or in our lives, we can have an experience of being unfortunate or fortunate. So that's what we really want to talk about a bit more. So I want to give some credit to the title of today's talk, which came to me from a series of books and a film and even a Netflix series about Lemony Snicket. And in this particular case, a Lemony Snicket and an unfortunate series of events. Lemony Snicket is actually the pen name for a gentleman by the name of Dan Handler, who wrote these books. Just an unfortunate series of events alone sold 60 million copies. And if they're going to do a film and a Netflix series, and people are still reading these books today, even years after their publishing, there's some nuggets in there that are worth embracing, right? So what I wanted to share with you were two quotations from Lemony Snicket. Oh, and let me just tell you, the story that's in an unfortunate series of events is about three orphans who are taken in by Lemony Snicket, and I believe he's their uncle, but he's not the nicest fellow. He's kind of interested in their parents' inheritance a lot more than he is the children themselves. And so these orphans do have a series of unfortunate and fortunate events at the hands of Lemony Snicket. So there's two quotations I want to share with you that really captured my imagination, and you'll have to hang with me because they feel a little dark in the beginning, but hang in and we'll get there. So Lemony Snicket says, everyone wakes up at some point in their lives in the middle of the night with the feeling they are all alone in the world. Nobody loves them now, and nobody ever will. And that they will never again have a decent night's sleep and will spend their lives wandering blearily around a loveless landscape, hoping desperately that their circumstances will improve, but suspecting in their heart of hearts that they will remain unloved and wandering forever. Okay, it's a pretty bleak picture when you take a look at just that piece of it. But we're going to focus a lot on the word in their circumstances. Okay. The second one is related to an experience that, I have definitely had, and I know that many of you have as well. And that is an experience of the death of someone who's very close to us. And this is one of the things that Lemony Snicket says about that. It is the curious thing, the death of a loved one. We all know our physical time in this world is limited. And we will all eventually end up under some sheet never to wake up. And yet, it always seems to be a surprise when it happens to someone we know. it's like walking up the stairs to our bedroom in the dark and thinking there is one more stair than there is. Your foot falls down through the air, and there is a moment of dark surprise as you try to readjust the way you thought of things. I could really identify with that, especially in the newness of grief with someone that was dearly beloved to me. So, how do you take statements like this and shift them, or life circumstances and shift them from the unfortunate to the fortunate? So stepping into or shifting this, it's not a matter of luck. You know, you don't get lucky and nobody you know ever dies. You don't get lucky and you never have adverse circumstances happen in your life. Even the most advanced metaphysicians have experiences in life that are challenging or upsetting or difficult. It's more a matter of our willingness to continue to experiment and experience life with not an optimistic point of view, but more of a point of view that we can overcome and that we have tools that can help us to be those overcomers. You know, we talk a lot about prayer and meditation. We talk a lot about things like guided meditation and mindfulness and observation without condemnation. But one of the things that really struck me during the time that our discussion group was looking at this booklet on healing 1,000 different ways was that there are lots more ways that we can access spirit than just some of the ones, and not to minimize them, because Butch would say you can never think about, talk about, experience, or practice prayer and meditation too much, because it really is a spiritual practice. But sometimes if you can't sit still or you can't quiet your thoughts, there are other ways to shift from the unfortunate to the fortunate. And I'd like for us to take a few minutes today to take a look at those. You don't have to believe what I say about this, and you don't have to adopt these. Some of them will resonate with you, and some of them will not. And some of them you will be like, yeah, that ain't happening for me. And that's really okay, because this is an individual pursuit. You know, our fifth principle says it's not enough to know these truths, we must live them. And so the idea of spiritual practice is that we find the ways that work for us, that keep us grounded, centered, and connected to our spirit within. And one of the things that the group discovered in our journey through the 7 weeks was that at different times and places, different things have worked for us. For different people, different things worked for them. And that it's really okay to pick and choose from what I think of as the smorgasbord of spiritual principle that is there to serve us and to serve the world. So one of the things, again, I want to go back to this thing about people saying that sometimes unity is fuzzy about what we believe. The idea is that if we really focus on our own observations of truth, what are the things that speak to us in the truth statements of unity, we can get way less fuzzy about what it is that not only that unity says it believes, but about what we believe ourselves. So ask yourself, what is it that I do believe? I'd like to know what that is for myself. It isn't necessary that anybody else know that for you or with you, although it's wonderful that we have a community where we're able to share a lot of that together. But knowing what you believe, you know, we every week in our Sunday service, we do our mission statement and our foundation statement. Ask yourself, do I say those with gusto and zeal? Do I believe them in the deepest part of my being? So, what are some of the things that you may want to consider? And we can talk about this some Excuse me, I need a drink here. We can talk about this some in our discussion, and our pieces of music today are going to echo that as well. But what are some of the methods that you may want to consider for yourself? Well, for some people, journaling is very helpful. I used to do a lot of that when I was a lot younger, not as much so much in recent years. Um, but I believe that many of the great writings that we have, Charles Fillmore didn't sit down and write books. He wrote what was on his heart and mind, and it got put into books. So your journaling can be clarifying for you if it's a mode that works for you and helps you to shift your perspective from am I having an unfortunate experience or am I having a fortunate experience? We need to be willing to take a look at whether we are willing to embrace our own personal healing. We all have our histories, for better or for worse. We all have our traumas. And one of the things that I was reminded of powerfully in this book was the fact that we can't just get rid of our traumas or our history. We have to replace them with positive habits, things that fill the space that has been taking up. It's said that Charles Fillmore did forgiveness work every night before he went to bed. Are we willing to welcome forgiveness on a regular, ongoing basis? Can that help us to facilitate a shift? I know that practicing self-care has become incredibly important for me in the last few years. I invite you to find out what that means for you. And it really means different things for everybody. But I believe that it really is an everyday practice, every day. And the other thing we need to continue to keep doing is breathing, right? I'm not giving you a list of things to do because I want you to go, holy cow, April already got enough to do in my life, and you want me to incorporate more. No, pick and choose what works for you and breathe through it and continue to breathe. Another thing we focused on in the booklet, and I think is important for those of us who are emotive beings, is don't resist your emotions, but remember that they come to pass, not to drive the bus cross country. We can welcome them, we can respect them, and yet we don't have to live every moment of our life in emotions that can actually be quite fleeting, right? And if you need some support in moving through that, there's lots of ways to support yourself in processing and transforming your emotions. We talked a lot in just the last couple of weeks about the power of music in our discussion group and how transformative it is. We all in the group had a song that was a linchpin for us about reminding us who we were and what we came there for, and we shared those. Find your own positive playlist that you can use when you're feeling unfortunate as opposed to fortunate. Find processes that can help you go deeper, such as quantum living or radical forgiveness. There are a lot of new thought and world processes that can help to support you. If it's a modality that agrees with you and where you are in life, or even if you've just been curious about it, engage in some healing body work or some kind of Reiki or energy healing to help you move along in your process. Sometimes things can get stuck in our bodies and we need to hit the reset button. And sometimes getting some healing work from someone who's helping to facilitate your healing can be helpful. And remembering to breathe, right? We need to continue to do that. The last two items I'll mention to you are one is be willing. Just be willing to be with what is showing up in your life and asking yourself, is this fortunate or is this unfortunate? And how can I make the shift from one to the other? What's the gold that's in this for me? And then last but not least, a powerful lesson that I got reminded of incredibly strongly just recently was ask for help if you need it. Ask for help. Don't be ashamed. Don't think you have to pour pink Pepto-Bismol all over everything. I mean, a friend called me and said, "What can I do for you? What could you use some help with?" And I in a moment of sheer honesty, I said, I can't even think about what to do to put lunch together today. And you want me to tell you what you can do for me on a larger level?" And my beloved friend said, "What do you want for lunch and what time do you want it?" I was reminded in that moment that people want to help. Who was it that said, look for the helpers? Well, I got news for you. They're there. They're all around us. I'm blessed to have many, 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 some of them by virtue of this community and some by a series of fortunate events. But what it allowed me to do was to realize that in the moment of a really big challenge, I could still invite in joy. I could still invite in peace. I could still invite in the healing power of love. And I got news for you folks. In my life, that's what shifts me from unfortunate to fortunate. So I share these things with you, not because I think that they are your answers, but because they have been mine and they've been helpful and they've been useful. And if there are any of them that are even remotely useful for you, I'm happy to share them. And what I'd like for us to do now is focus on our breath and move into a short time of meditation. So if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes or you can soften your gaze. You can notice in your body if there's anything in particular, where any place in particular that you're holding tension or tightness. And as we move into this time of practical meditation, let me remind you of Paul's words in Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And let us use these words to call us to renewal and shift our thinking, to shift our thinking about anything in life, most particularly from the experience of the unfortunate to the experience of the fortunate. So let's start within our mind and our body by thinking about and acknowledging a desire within us to transform. It doesn't have to be a specific situation or circumstance, although sometimes that can be helpful. And we invite that acknowledgement, that recognition into this time of peace. And as you continue to breathe at your own pace, center your attention on your inner self, that God presence within you, within each of us. And be willing to be open to guidance and direction from that inner space. What is it within your life circumstances? Where is it that you would like to experience transformation? Of the challenging, of what feels unfortunate. Shifting what may be seeming hard into something that could be easy. Allow yourself to experience gratitude for the opportunity to join together in group meditation, where we are all holding each other's consciousness with the gentlest hands and the tenderest hearts. Where we are on a journey together. Allow yourself to even see beyond what is this desire for transformation to what might be there for you. It could be a lesson, it could be an opportunity, it could be a relationship that renews itself in a new way, in a revelation, in a sense of freedom, in a feeling of peace. Make a commitment to yourself to move out into the rest of your day, the rest of your week, with a renewed commitment to your own path and to seeing that desire for transformation manifest in your life, whatever that may look like for you. And again, allow gratitude for the opportunity to have this experience together and on our own. Allowing yourself to rest in this idea of the fullness of fortunate events, the opportunity to experience unspeakable joy, even in the midst of challenge and opportunity. And I'll close out this portion of our meditation with an affirmation. I now let go of any thought of disharmony and scarcity. I affirm health, harmony, and plenty. And this is my truth. I now let go any thought of disharmony or scarcity. I affirm health, harmony, and plenty. This is my truth. And so allow your next couple of breaths to bring you more and more present into this space and in this place and back together with this company of angels. And so it is. And so we let it be. Amen.